Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. Hope you had a good lunch, but maybe I ought to make you stand up and do the hokey pokey because you know you get that kind of lethargicness after lunch. So if I see anybody nodding off, I'm going to instantly stop and we're going to do the Macarena or something like that to keep everybody alive and going. Well, thank you very much. We have our panelists in place. This session is about building your plan. So hopefully you got something out of the learning sessions and you will walk away with a plan that you can start to implement when you get back. President Eisenhower famously said, "In preparing for battle, I have always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable." In this session, our panelists will outline creating an effective game plan and strategy for your organizations. They will discuss selecting initiatives and and positioning initiatives within your organization's overarching strategic plan. We're going to talk about how we can adapt previous strategies for 2022, how we can shift from compliance-based tracking to proactive strategy. And the key is proactive. How do we use strategy to improve cybersecurity maturity within your organizations? I'd like to introduce our panelists, and they could raise their hands as I mention their names. Greg Sisson, he's the CISO for the Department of Energy. Mark Montgomery, Executive Director of Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Mario Highland, the founder of Aegis. So I will go over, I'm going to sit with them instead of talking at them. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good day. Very well.
Can everybody hear me pretty good? Okay. All right.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Good.
Okay. Okay, first question. Why don't we all know that the most challenging part of strategic planning is the implementation. In your experience, what do leaders need to do in order to shift from planning to action?
I want to start with you. Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
First. So to go from planning to action.
Execution.
Or from planning to execution. We were just talking about that in the other room, and I think it's so important to step back and take the time to identify the problem and make sure that you're planning on the right problem. Because a lot of times, planners will get to immediately just start to writing or start to defining a plan without understanding the problem. And so if leadership gives you a problem to go work on, it's good to go do some quick analysis and then repeat it back to them. Go back, and I think that comes from a military background. It's a briefing back to the commander and really understanding his or her intent and what the real problem is. I think that's the most important part of planning, is really trying to understand the intent and then where you want to get to, or the end state. And then you can really start to lay out a plan for the organization.
So I could probably fall back on 32 years in the military and quote 4-star generals on planning. I actually take it very cyber and say, I've noticed that as you go to implementation, the most important thing is to make sure that you've got all 3 legs of the stool. We often say technology, we kind of center our plan around a new technology. I think it's making sure that the other 2 legs, policy and processes and personnel, are in place, and often they have to be in place first. Normally, when you take, we're going to do 2.0 or 3.0 or something, you're rolling it out. It's centered around a piece of technology, and then you do the training for the people as it comes online. I think probably the most important thing is to take that extra time and expenditure in your implementation to get the people part right and the policy and processes part right and in place before the technology rolls in. I know that's hard, and I know that's hard with so much technology upgrades going on versus any other kind of element of your business operation. But that 3-legged stool is critical, and if you don't build that in, your implementation plan is going to fall apart.
Right. Can I redirect real quick? So I think that's a really good point, and a lot of times we go directly to the technology when in fact a people or process change could have fixed the problem. So I agree. I think understanding and looking at the problem from a in your plan from a people, processes, and technology perspective is very important. And a lot of times you really don't need to buy new technology necessarily. You can just fix it with a process change.
So I think that that we get trapped sometimes in the plan, and we think that planning sort of is the end all and be all. The plan should be iterative. It should be dynamic. And the plan should lead to a good driver around requirements. We see a lot of time, as my colleague here has said, we rush to technology. We should make sure we're spending enough time making sure we're identifying the requirements. And I always challenge everyone, if you're putting together a plan and if you're driving requirements, please ask, how are we going to test those requirements? How are we going to make sure that we understand what success looks like? And those requirements shouldn't always be based on happy path approaches. We should always be making sure we understand negative exception, out of bounds conditions, because that's where a lot of our security vulnerabilities sneak in. They expose those opportunities, those flaws within our software. And if we're not testing the negatives, then we're just leaving the door open for adversaries to test for us. Make no mistake, our systems are going to be tested each and every day. If not by us, by somebody else. So I encourage you, good requirements, good success criteria, make part of a successful plan.
Hey, let me just add on, it's great. You're from Aegis, the real Aegis, the Navy's Aegis Weapon Systems Program, actually had the line, build a little, test a little, plan a little. And that's how a guy named Wayne Meyer built the Aegis system over 40 years, probably considering everything else that we get wrong in the military in terms of over budget, late. One of the few things that delivers, it's because it kept to an idea of build a little, test a little, plan a little, and then build a little, test a little, plan a little. It's been very effective over 40 years. And you stole the name.
No.
Thank you. Well, building on the last question, cybersecurity strategy, arguably the EO, is generally focused on compliance rather than productivity. What can we do to shift this paradigm? Nobody likes compliance. When I was at the Department of Agriculture, I was responsible for governance. You say the word governance, everybody runs. So what can we do to take it from compliance to actual doing it with a smile on their face?
I think it's a great question, and the CIO and Duncan and I have, ever since the executive order came out, one of the big things that we've been talking about is, especially in the Department of Energy, it's a very decentralized cybersecurity program with very different risk tolerance across the national laboratories, the sites, the plants, everything from open science research to national nuclear security. And so this idea of just taking a compliance approach just doesn't even work. We can't go there. And so taking a risk-based, pragmatic approach and enabling people to understand how different elements of the executive order are going to affect and enable their mission and enable them to do better cybersecurity is the approach we're taking. And not only that, but we've all got very limited resources. This is a billion-dollar endeavor for the Department of Energy to fully implement every aspect of the executive order. And so when you get small amounts of money, you got to figure out, how are you going to spend that money to have the
is when somebody shows up with a large checklist and and some green eye shade and says, let's get down to business. That doesn't mean there isn't probably some value in for the first hour, just making sure the person is in fact the CISO that you're talking to, and then you have to move into online operative checks, things that absolutely test the system in play. And or as we would say in the military, in run, and make sure that that's what we're doing. And then the beauty of that is it should be left behind. And you should move off of, it's the inspection this week to, we have running in the background a system. And I know that there's great companies that do that and provide that product, because that is where we have to move to. That maybe that technology needs to get better on the quality of those products, but we have to get that mentality. you will not defeat an advanced persistent threat team with a checklist. You can defeat them with systems running in the background that are updated iteratively. You know, go back to the build, iterate, and plan.
So my comment would be on that is we have to improve transparency. It's only through transparency. It's only through transparency that we're going to be able to determine if we have security in depth and how to be managed by exception. You're absolutely right. We cannot be managing from checklists. We can't be checking everything every day. We don't have the capacity to do that. Rather, we need the surveillance in place. Well, I would challenge you. If the first person that you talk to within an organization says that, well, we use risk-based management, and the answer to that is, well, wait, if you manage by risk, do you wait for something to happen? That's the opposite of proactive. So yes, use risk, use NIST risk management framework, absolutely. But you can't wait until a vulnerability is exposed to say that, well, I'm working on that. It doesn't work that way. But back to my earlier statement, if you build a requirement, if we know what that requirement is, if we know how to test it, then we can surveil that test, we can create a dashboard, we can create the way to monitor it, and then you can forget about it. If we have the right monitoring in place, if the transparency is there and it's running in the background, then we'll alert you. We will alert you when we see something that's wrong. But if I come into you and say, here's a technology, it solves all your problems, sure, write me $1 billion, have a great day, I'll spend it. We're not going to make the headway that we need to against the level of adversaries. Because when you talk about planning, the best planners out there right now are our adversaries. We're putting a half-hearted effort into planning. They're putting a systematic approach into planning. They're planning their attack on us. So, there's great analogies out there. I heard one during lunch. On the defensive side, we have to be perfect every day. They only need to be perfect once. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do as an industry. Yeah. So this is a heartburn of mine, and forgive me. We would need a lot less cybersecurity defensive mechanisms if we had a lot more rigor in the process of developing software. Make no mistake about it. Part of the exploits, part of what's happening out there is because we have negative exception and error handling conditions that are not handled by the software, the people who are exploiting those vulnerabilities are usually bad actors. And you've heard of, and please, I don't mean to spin this conversation in a bad way, but the DoD is trying with CMMC. There's some political issues with CMMC. I want to set those aside, but the mission is still there. Make no mistake about it. Supply chain, the entire supply chain needs to be protected. When you think about insider threat isn't your colleagues, people working beside you. It's the organizations that you are rightfully letting in to be part of your supply chain. They can become attack vectors. There's a lot to what we need to do, and we talk about zero trust security and all of these different things. These are really, really tough frameworks and processes to put in place, and while there is some governance and there is some policies and procedures, and certainly we need to train people, there's a lot of work to be done. And it's going to start with good planning, and yes, we need to do some upfront work that we're not doing, and we get into this crutch where we think, well, security will fix all those problems, and we shouldn't be leaning on that.
Well, first, I'd attach myself to what you said there, with probably one exception, which is that I think we also have to learn how to lose. When people say, they only have to win once, we have to, win every day. I think on the defense, we have to learn how to lose and then extract ourselves from a loss. In other words, how, when you've been successfully penetrated, do you limit and hold in place the adversary so that you can then remove him, in an effective way? And how do we prevent his or her maneuver through your network. And that's hard, and sometimes we get fixated on the walls and not so much on how we do that inside. And this isn't just zero trust. This is about how do you prevent that kind of movement and access in your systems, which zero trust can help address, but it's not the only issue in there. And just accept that you can lose. I mean, it is okay, and then you have to figure out how to minimize that. And also, the final thing I say on that is redundancy and recovery. You know, the part of resilience that we really don't like to think about is how fast can you bring this back after it turns out you failed. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge at a national level, but it's also a challenge at a corporate level. Even at, you know, the smaller Ted's dry cleaner, eventually it's a challenge if he can't get his payment systems back online. So we just have to work our way through that system.
One of the things I know working with the scientific community, and sometimes see a big challenge. With all of your national labs, how do you get them to understand the whole ecosystem between planning and execution? And how do you get them to ascribe to some of the policies that you're trying to put in place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if everybody can hear the question or not, but she was talking about, you know, how do we get everybody together, especially the scientific national laboratories, to come together and plan and actually execute a strategy. And one of the big things that I've worked on since I've been at the department over the last 4 years is building trust, because that's an important part. You know, when I got there, a lot of organizations didn't trust the headquarters. All they ever heard out of headquarters was a mandate and a direction, you know, to do something, or compliance. You know, something came out of OMB and you have to do this. But it's working with them to understand the mission, going out and seeing all of the other work that they're doing, and understanding the impact of when you say something from headquarters, what does that actually mean on the ground, and how does that affect their ability to do the research that they're being paid to do. They do a lot of work around the world. They do a lot of global work in scientific research, and they have researchers from countries that we would consider, you know, to be threats. I mean, they have nuclear research with researchers in Iran and in Russia, and so we have to be able to allow them to allow researchers to get access to certain things and do it in a safe way. So it's going on the ground and understanding the research that they're doing, understanding the mission that they're doing, and how do we enable that mission, and how do we make it easier for them while protecting the rest of the department, making sure that we're not impacting other parts of the department's mission. Multi-factor authentication is one of those ways. I mean, HSPD 12 PIV cards just aren't going to work for somebody that's running a global research project. We got to figure out ways to come up with other means to still do multi-factor, but it's not going to be using a PIV card. We're not going to be able to issue a token, a hard token, or a PIV card to every researcher. So let's sit down and figure out how do we get to yes, and do it in a way that still protects the data and still meets the intent of what the compliance said.
No, I'm fine.
So one of the things Aegis does is we run a global testing lab, over 54 countries, 900 organizations, over 5,000 individuals testing different parts of solutions. And so what we found in running that lab is we're constantly under a threat for distributed denial of service attacks and different things like that. So it's our planning around how we would handle those types of attacks, and then making sure that we're able to sustain when those attacks come. And it's all about back to planning, back to making sure that we have the rigors in place. But we need the labs, and the labs are going to drive our ability to gain knowledge and then determine our preparedness.
The last panel discussed emerging trends. What is your advice to leaders looking to adapt current strategic plans to incorporate these trends? Start with you, Mario.
Okay. Well, I would say that, following my colleague here talking about, when it's okay to fail, and I do believe in failing forward, we need good forensics. We need the ability to be able to audit. We need provenance around data to be sure. Those would be my ideas around things that we can put in place right now to help industry, help our government, help our agencies ensure their mission?
You know, I think mine would be more cautionary, which is that we have to remember that we're burdened. You know, in the Navy, we used to say you have three fleets. You have the fleet you have, the fleet you're building, and the fleet you're planning for. And, you know, these emerging technologies are the fleet you're planning for. You have to still take care of the fleet you have and the fleet you're building. And where that comes in, I'll give you a good example. Quantum computing, the defense against quantum computing attacks on our encryption system. NSA, a number of years ago, figured out this was an issue and started to budget, said, hey, it's 15 years out, we'll just make this number up, $100 million a year, we'll be okay, we'll have the defense of quantum computing. What happened is every year their legacy cryptography, but you know, how they defend their legacy systems, crept up on them, and they'd steal money from that future quantum computing issue. So now we'll just say you're 7 years out. First of all, maybe the Chinese even moved that bar to the left for you. They're the only country that moves the bar to the left on construction and development. But now it's not just, oh, we missed 500 million. It's an exponential factor to catch up on this technology. So if you put that more broadly in companies for emerging technology, you've got to properly resource for the legacy you have and how you defend that, you know, the fleet in being and the fleet you're building. And then how do you invest in that future fleet that you're going for? That takes a lot of discipline. And it takes the CFO not letting the COO reach in and grab from the research and development kitty when it's time. And that kind of discipline, it certainly doesn't exist in the federal government. I think we can stipulate that. But then again, we don't have to have a balanced budget. The question is, does it work? And we've certainly demonstrated that for 25 or so years. Does that exist in your company?
I mean, it was perfect lead-in. It certainly doesn't happen in the federal government. I mean, I would love to be able to look at emerging technologies. I'd love to be able to have my own personal kind of, you know, our own department level laboratory where you can just look at emerging technologies. And that part of the budget, even if you wanted to do it, it just always gets overcome. It's really hard to do in the federal government, is to look hard at emerging technologies and kind of look beyond, you know, your budget cycle. So beyond about 2 or 3 years. So unfortunately, I mean, we would love to do it more.